Let me just mute myself here. I'm also trying to see if online, but is it going on YouTube?
Yeah.
Okay, just
tweeted
about it.
Also trying to see if online, but is it going on YouTube? Okay, wonderful. So as usual, we're starting like with a good positive aloha from Hawaii, of course. You can see like the weather is pretty amazing. So, hey JS family, how's everyone doing? This is an exciting event. Like we have, for the first time, we're hosting JS online event. So welcome everyone. How's everyone doing? I hope you're having a good time. As you can see, I am. It's beautiful weather. It's just a lot of positive vibes. And what I was going to say and see is I'm very excited. I'm very excited because we have two wonderful guests that I'm excited to see. It's Christian Heilmann and Michael Hladky will be entertaining you today, our rock stars on stage, virtually, of course. But it's incredibly nice to see both of them again because they're amazing speakers, amazing scholars, and teachers. And that's how I view them, at least. And you will all definitely benefit so much from just spending some time hearing from them and listening to what they have to, what kind of knowledge they have to put forward. So without further ado, I'll let Michael take the stage. Enjoy yourselves, learn a lot, and be sure to subscribe and leave your comments in the chat for any questions. Aloha,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you so much, Ski. Thank you so much for the great introduction. So one more time, we have today Michael and Chris, and the first rock the stage, Michael. So Michael, the stage is yours. Whoa!
Thanks a lot. So today we have a Q&A session, and I already have the list of questions that entered in front of me, and I try to organize them in a good way. One of a very general question is, I will read the question. The question is observables without a question mark. I guess I start this one first, and I quickly share my screen so that you can see what I'm doing. A second. Okay, now you should see my screen. Is this true?
Yay.
Perfect. So observables. So if you have arrays, you basically have a set of items, and this set of items exists right now in your computer. You know how many items in this list are, and you also can access them directly by pulling out items one by pointing to a specific index in this array and getting this item. And this is pulling out items from a collection. And observables are also collections of items, but you cannot pull them out. They get pushed to you. This is one principle that reactive programming follows, push-based. The items get pushed to you and you have to react to it. A second very interesting thing about observables is, in comparison to a promise, which is also somehow push-based, observables are lazy. So what does lazy mean? If I open my slides here quickly, I close this one here. You see, if I create an observable, there is nothing happening. If you can also take a closer look, there is really nothing happening, but this small dash here. Why? Because an observable is lazy, and lazy stuff need a kick to do something. And how can you kick an observable? You can call subscribe on it. And in this very moment, you basically initialize the whole stream, and values can get pushed to you. So what can get pushed to you? Basically everything. In the browser, a very easy to grasp thing is a button click. Whenever the user clicks a button, you get this click event pushed to you and you can process it. And then you basically have the producer, which is the button, and the consumer, which is your subscription function that gets those values out. A second thing with observables is they have a lot of different operators. And this is a second question that I can add to this one. So observables are these push-based collections that are lazy, and then you can process the items with operators, as you can do with array first class functions like map, filter, and reduce. And this is the second question: what operators to use when? There are, if you only count creation, methods, and operators, more than 120. And if you also include subjects and other parts, there are 150 or something, so quite a lot. What I learned over the time when I explored this kind of programming, especially the RxJS library, I realized that it is not maybe the best way to just go to the documentation page and look at this wall of operators and have no clue. You can basically try to group them and apply certain strategies that I'll use, certain learning strategies. Let me quickly see if I have slides here for these learning strategies that I can also show. Learn RxJS tools, perfect. So I can share my screen again. And you will now see a set of learning tools that I created to help people to get a faster overview. And one of the things that I have here is that I have certain different tools. I first categorize them with types, I order them, and then I do something that I call the algebraic approach, where I split those operators into pieces, and then I have also metrics to group them and get a good overview. And the first type of observable that we want to categorize is a creation function. This is this box, and out of this box is coming an output, an observable. So you create one out of nothing. And the second type of stuff that I want to categorize is an operator, and an operator receives something, then it is the box, and then there is the output. So this is the difference that you should know when you think about observables. And then there is the principle of the order. So an observable can carry single values, but an observable can also carry an observable of single values, or it can carry an observable of observables of single values. So the order of observables, and same goes with the order of operators. So you can have an operator that returns a single value, an operator that can return an observable, and you can directly correlate this with higher order functions. Here you can think about higher order operators. And if you know those two category groups, you can basically go over and start to take a set of operators and split them. And this is the algebraic approach, which is, in my opinion, most useful. What algebra means is literally translated reunion of broken parts. I'm not a math genius, to be honest. I was never good in math, but I remembered this stuff, and I guess it is a good analogy to what I did. I basically took a bunch of broken pieces, and then I look at an operator with these broken pieces. So if, for example, I have the operator switch map 2, I look at this operator, break it into their smallest pieces, which is switch, map, and 2. And if I understand what the principle of switch is doing, and I know the principle of a map, and I know the principle of a 2, I can intuitively think about it. What is switch map 2 doing? And if you learn operators in that way, you have to learn only a very, very limited set of principles, of broken pieces, and you get a good intuition of what an operator might do or might not do. Of course, this works not always because the naming is kind of weird sometimes, but it covers really a big part, and it will motivate you to learn the stuff with a little bit more fun. And the last thing of this set of learning tools are operator metrics. And what is an operator matrix? Well, maybe you know a matrix from math. I didn't know it. I just Googled matrix mathematics, and then I found this picture and placed it here, and people that know math will have a clue. I don't, but I understand what a matrix is doing. And I created my own matrix out of operators. And then I started to slice this matrix into first order and higher order in the vertical line, and I sliced this matrix into static functions or creation functions and operators to left and right. And then I created matrices like this. Oops, there is too many stuff on the screen. Disappear. You see, it disappeared. And if you categorize this stuff, you will see that you end up with switch map 2, switch map all, switch scan, then all merge, then all concat. This is the vertical. And horizontal, you have all operators, or two operators, or map 2 operators, or with operators. And if you start to group them in a matrix, you will get a very good sense of what a group of operators is for, and then you can cover with one set a lot of operators and really see how they correlate to other operators and where the similarities are. And with those learning tools, I guess you can go quite a long way with not a lot of effort, and hopefully it makes a little bit more fun than just learning this wall of operators by your own. The next question, what is the difference between buffer and window? Let me quickly search slides. So buffer, if I find it, here. So buffer is maybe something that we may guess what it is doing, but window is kind of unintuitive. And therefore I created the diagrams for it, and I will now go into a little bit more detail what buffering and windowing is doing. There is the buffer operator. Basically, we look now at a marble diagram. A marble diagram is a special type of diagram that displays behavior over time. And as the online, the original diagrams of RxJS are pretty meaningless when it comes to bigger operators, I created my own standard of a diagram. This is working. It is covering the full set of RxJS operators in a way that you can reproduce, so everybody could stick to the rules and draw operators or processes over time in general. And this is one of those diagrams that displays as buffer. And buffer basically takes an input observable here, and then if you call buffer, you can add something in. You can give this buffer another trigger. In my case, it is a button click trigger. This purple dots here is a button click, and these green things are values that enter the observable operator. And what buffer is doing, it stores all the values in an array, it buffers them. And whenever you are ready, you click the button, and then you will get an emission of the full set of buffered values here. And then you emit an array of 2 items, an array of 3 items. This is basically buffer. And buffer has a variety of variations, a very nice sentence. And this variety of variation is like buffer count, which gives you a number, so it buffers to a specific number. Then you have buffer time. Guess what? It buffers on a time window. And then you have buffer toggle, where you can start and stop the buffering. And then you have buffer when, which is basically a method that, what is it doing? It's taking a function, a duration selector that you can pass in, and then it will basically do something on a specific emission. And I don't want to go into very detail on what the different buffer operators are doing. I just wanted to give you this overview and compare it now with window operators. So what are window operators? I will try to search the word window here, and if we have a hit, perfect. We end with window. Maybe quickly, let me show you what the original diagram is looking like. If we look at this diagram, we see that what we are missing in the original standard is the internals of the operator. So if I now switch to window, you will see inside of this box is now some logic and some processes displayed. And now I try to explain to you what a window is doing compared to buffer. So as buffer receives these green values and had this trigger, a window operator has also a trigger when it starts or stops the window, and also incoming values. It is equal to the buffer set of operators. What's the difference? So if you remember this higher order operator category that I showed you, and there is also a higher order observable. It's a very abstract thing. If you will read about it, it will take some time to digest it. At least it took me forever to understand what a higher order observable is and how I can treat it. But what window is returning is an observable of observables. So it is not returning single values or an array of values as buffer would do. It is returning an observable. And window is basically starting to emit an observable, this one here, and then it starts the windowing process, which means I forward all the incoming value to this first window. And I colored the first window yellow. And then when somebody clicks the button, this is happening here, then I stop the window and I start a new window. So instead of buffering them in a set of array and we do batch processing, we start to slice a stream of values into substream of values, and we can process them independently. And what we can do with this is, we can, for example, implement logic as whenever you don't click the button every 2 seconds, something will happen or not. And then you can look at a 2-second window and see values in there. While you would use buffer time, after 2 seconds, you would receive an array with one item or not, but you don't know at which time this item was emitted. So to sum up quickly, the difference between buffer and window is buffer is doing batch processing. It buffers items into a set, into an array, and emits this array at one single emission. And a window or the set of window operators is emitting observables with those value insights that arrive over time. We have window count, same as buffer count. We have window time, same as buffer time. We have window toggle, same as buffer toggle. And we have window when, same as buffer when. Now, if we remember the learning tools, we could split them into window, into when, into time, and then we could put all those information into a matrix, and then we could try to understand what buffer and window is doing, and then we would understand a set of 12 operators, which is pretty cool if you ask me. So I always try to use these learning tools to refresh my knowledge on the operators and really compare them to each other. And I benefit a lot because learning all those things is hard, at least for me. So maybe you can also get something out of it. The next question. TypeScript best practices. I can only assume what the people what this person want to know. I assume you want to ask how I should deal with TypeScript in relation to RxJS. As for some reason I ended up being this RX guy, and people only ask me stuff about this, but I'm also good in other stuff. Yeah, TypeScript. In best case, you let the operators do the work. In best case, you don't strictly or statically type those operators. You just have to type the incoming value, and then the operators will do the work for you. Values flowing through this pipe, and you can be sure that the operators itself will do the magic for you, and you end up with a very well typed thing. There are edge cases, beautiful t-shirt here. I hope it is a stretch t-shirt because it scales better. Oh, so I should send you my address to get the t-shirt. So what was this hint? Good. So sum it up, let RxJS do the work for you, and in very, very few cases, you really need to type it. Maybe I can ask Darius to quickly look in YouTube if there are new questions, because I only have my handwriting here. I quickly show you that you can see my beautiful handwriting. Yeah, I can barely read it on my own, but this is how life goes. Darius, when there are other questions in YouTube, just interrupt me. Otherwise, I will go on with the next question here that says, yes, I want to know how Angular 9 and Ionic 4 work on top. And I assume you ask if Angular 9 and Ionic 5 will work together. I believe this is no problem. I have to look up the version, but you can be sure that for every Angular version, there's an Ionic version that will work for you. If I would relate this question to RxJS, I can only forward to my friend Mike Hardington from the Ionic team. He created a fully reactive Angular Ionic application with state management, with rendering in the template without zone. Thanks, Michael, to use my libraries for reactive and zoneless Angular. It was a really cool experience to do this coding with you. And you can look at this project. It is open source, and it shows you a music player written in Angular Ionic and the Apple Music API or something like that. And you can have a full set of examples there. So I guess I cannot really give you the right answer than pointing to the code. Next is very hard for me to read. When to use what operators is done. Angular Ionic is done, Observer is done, TypeScript is done, buffer window is done. Switches. There is a question that says switches. Yes, this is an English word. I also have switches at home. And if you want to buy switches, special switches, handmade switches, I'm a switches producer. I will later on send my online shop for handmade switches. But if you want to know about the switch map operator or the variety of switch map operators, I can maybe show you some diagrams. I will switch to the screen sharing, and you can see the set of flattening operators. Flattening operators is a bigger group that you can also organize in a matrix, but one set of flattening operators are the switch map operators. And I guess I have to use a real life example to give you a clue what switch map is doing after I scroll down to the diagrams. So first the original diagram online, and then my custom diagram. And here you can really see what is happening compared to here. So what is switch map doing? Switch map is a higher order operator, and this higher order operator basically helps you to receive single values, call a function that I shortcutted with SN here. This function is returning an observable, and this observable is emitting values. And these internal emitted values are getting forwarded to my output stream. This is basically in general a process that is happening in switch map, merge map, exhaust map, and concat map, the set of flattening operators. And why is switch map special? And now I want to introduce a real life example. Let's say you have a button click and you refresh the page, or let's say you have an input box and you search something. And whenever you type something, you send an HTTP request with this string to the server and you receive a set of items. And you can imagine that when you type fast, you will send a lot of HTTP requests. And if you don't care about it, and we will stick with not caring about this overfetching, we could end in a race condition. Why? Because as far as I know, we cannot control the packages that are walking through the internet, that are routed through the internet. And I'm pretty sure this is right. So whenever we send a lot of packages and questions to the server in a row, we could end up in a situation where question 1 is sent, then question 2 is sent, then question 2 arrives, and then answer 2 arrives, and then answer 1 arrives. So question 1 is faster answered than question 2, or the other way around. And this is called a race condition. And what we do normally with vanilla JavaScript is we either use the abort controller and we hack around with a promise and try to invent a cancelable promise, which is, if you ask me, a really hard job. This is annoying. And then you, whenever the new request calls, you have to use this abort controller and cancel the promise, or you can just turn it into an observable, and then you can use the switch map operator, which is a one-liner compared to, I guess, a 250 lines of handwritten cancellation logic. So what is switch map doing? You receive a value, you go to the server, you ask for the answer, and maybe it is a WebSocket that can give you more answers than one, or maybe it is just one answer, but this will end up in an emission that you receive. And let's say this emission here takes a little bit longer, because here is the second request. And if this emission would take longer, we would have this mess up. We will end up in a strange result. So therefore, switch map is basically unsubscribing from the previous, let's say in this case, HTTP request, taking the new value, creating the new observable, and subscribing to the new one. And then it only emits the new observables, the new values. So this case of a race condition is not occurring here anymore. And I guess if I just go back to original set, this is a rough explanation, but I hope I could get the point in this very limited time. Let me quickly show you that there are more operators. There is a switch map operator. There is a switch map to operator. There is a switch or operator, and there is a switch scan operator. And this is basically the set of operators that are here for the switch procedure, for the switch behavior. And this is also my last question on the paper here. So if there are no other questions, and time is anyway limited and I don't want to steal too much, maybe there is one more question in YouTube or something like that. Otherwise, I would. We
have one more question. Are the slides available in internet?
Yeah, so I work on, because these are just operators. In real, I created a diagram standard. Maybe I can quickly show this. So you can see the screen still, yeah. So this is a design system. Maybe you know design systems from HTML and JavaScript. And this design system has some colors and whatever. And oh, this is the wrong one. And marble design system. No nesting operators. I'm sorry that I don't find it. Let me go here. multicasting draft in the Marble Design System. This is it. So this is what I will put online in a couple of weeks. I created a website that is documenting this standard. And here you see that I have tokens and font and everything is somehow specified and what lines are doing and documented. And in the end, you have a set of components that you can put together to a set of operators. And I first will open source this standard that you can use. And later on, I will also open source all the diagrams that I created. I have a couple of diagrams so far, I guess over 600. And I will polish them a little bit and publish them every week, a batch of operators when I'm done with publishing the standard itself. And this is a link that I can definitely share. There's a repository. If you Google Marble Design System, I have it in a repository, and there are all the links to all the documents that I created so far. Marble Design System on my GitHub profile. That's the end of the answer. Unsubscribe, complete. You are muted, Darius, so whatever you will say now, people will not hear you, and I'm pretty sure they want to.
Okay, Michael, thank you so much. Okay, so we don't have any other questions. So thank you so much for this valuable Q&A session.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, a lot of interesting information. So now the stage is your Chris. Chris, can you hear us? You are muted now.
Yes, I can hear you. I was just doing some things in PowerPoint, which hopefully didn't manage it to break. But we'll see in a second, I guess. Well, thanks for that. That was a lot of interesting things to do. I love that we ask for questions and people say one word, not even with a question mark at the end of it. It's kind of confusing to answer a question like that when there isn't any, but we'll see what's going on. I'm going to share my my slide deck now. The slide deck is available. The link is already on there as well in case you want to have it later on. And I want to talk through a few things that are on my mind right now and are basically on everybody's mind. The classic question now, can everybody see my slides? Yes, wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, I'm Chris. I'm a project manager on a product manager on developer tools in Microsoft. So I'm looking after the developer tools in the browser, and I'm also looking at the integration with Visual Studio Code and with other automation systems, like, for example, the Puppeteer stuff that we're doing, or anything that basically means what we can do in the browser to automate it for your users and for your own needs as well. So we're all living in a rather weird time right now, and we all have a lot more time on our hands than we normally have. And it's kind of bizarre that we spend that time at home. So I found myself being not on the road, not being traveling to the office, not traveling to the States all the time to see my team. And I found myself in need of some organization. I wanted to know what I'm doing, and I wanted to have something to rely on because everything else around us is going crazy and we don't know what's really happening. So I started organizing my clothes. I did a spreadsheet where I actually wrote down all the clothes that I own and then actually seeing if I need to buy some new ones or if I don't. And I thought it was a good idea at that time, but when I talk to people about this, they just shake their head and look at me in a strange way and stop talking to me, because I think maybe it's been a bit too much to start organizing your clothes. That's kind of a weird thing to do. So instead, I looked at that box of cables that I had at home. I guess it's a legal requirement that everybody over a certain age has a box or a drawer in his house with lots of cables and connectors that used to connect to mobile phones and hardware we had, and don't connect to anything anymore. So we don't know what we actually have. So I finally tackled that thing when I moved to my new flat. I had this huge box of things, and I started analyzing what is what. So I found like weird stuff and adapters. I found that I have like 9 headphones that I don't need, lots of Mac cables. And I realized that there's so many USB standards that it's actually, as a web standards guy, you kind of get jealous that these things are there. And I realized like, this is weird. We have so many things that we collected over the years and they were great at that time and we needed to have, and we wanted to have more of those. And instead of realizing what we have, we keep buying new ones, and we keep finding new ones as well. So that's something that I realized we're doing with what we are doing in our environments as well. So my job is to look at developer tools in the Chromium browser space. This is the Edge browser on Microsoft, for Microsoft right now. It's of course Google. It's of course Samsung's browser and many, many other things. Chromium is not only a browser engine, but it also powers things like Electron. It powers things like the automation of browsers. So it's a platform to build on top of. And it actually brings the web technologies that we always try to have in a browser in a space where you can build all kinds of things with it. And developer tools are the things to debug all of these environments with. And when we took on the Chromium core to our project, and we looked at the developer tools, we found that there's a lot of stuff in there that has been collected over the years, and hopefully people are using. And I myself found myself looking at things that I've never used before. And this is what I want to talk about today, to show you a few things that we got feedback from people asking us how it works. And we're actually found out ourselves we haven't been using them. So I'm part of a team. These are all my colleagues. They're all in America. I'm in Germany, so I'm the one who's actually late at night when they're coming into the morning. So Erica is there, Zohair, there's also Rachel, and there's Brendan. And these are the PMs. These are the product managers. We have all of us have several engineers under us, and also projects. Every project has a different engineer. We're also working a lot together with other companies, with Samsung, Google, Intel, to actually share this knowledge that we do, because everything we put into the developer tools right now goes upstream into the Chromium project. So any of the other browsers based on Chromium can also take these things on. And often we worked in concert with people like Google to actually get things in there. So I always found when it comes to tooling, there's this massive demands gap. We have useful, effective, and pretty amazing things in developer tools. But at the same time, I get requests from things that we don't actually need to do, or we don't even have a use for yet. Like a lot of times people see something new coming out on a mobile device, for example, that is not a web standard. So they're like, how do I debug this in the browser? And you're like, you can't. It's part of an operating system that is not the web, and we actually don't have access to it. There's probably a patent on it. It's not open source. We cannot do any debugging on it. And it took years for us to debug mobile devices remotely. We have this now, and that's pretty cool. But at the same time, it always fascinates me that we're always chasing the newest new thing, that we want to have something better, but we're not actually looking at what we have. And when I look at my past as a web developer, which started in 1997, we had Alert, and that was basically it. And then we actually started to have like Firebug, and we had like different things in browsers. And by now the developer tools are actually pretty amazing, but we're not quite seeing the value of them because we're still stuck in kind of a way of working that was honed years and years ago by putting alerts everywhere or putting console logs everywhere now. So there's kind of an assumption as well that like on the web, or especially in the startup space, you can build something, you ship it, and then it becomes a great success. So people keep asking us like, why is that not in developer tools yet? Why isn't it in there yet? And the reason is actually we cannot just ship it and it becomes a great success, or assume it becomes a great success, because whatever we put in there, we have to maintain for years to come. We cannot take things out as easily as you could on a product that actually is just a web-based product. It's something that people rely on, and lots of different developers with different needs rely on. So when you look at the reality of great software projects, it's not building or coding something and throwing it out there and hoping the community comes, but you actually do research first. You do a lot of like questioning of people, you do surveys, you do kind of like looking into what people really need. And often you actually have to go past the first request, and you have to think about what is they really want. They say something is broken, but it also points at a thing that might be actually better solved in another way. So then we design, we develop it, we deploy it, and we put it out there, and then we monitor it. Like we actually see how many people are opening a panel, how many people are clicking this submit button, how many people are actually looking at resizing things, how are people using developer tools? And I think it's very important that every software product thinks about that kind of involvement of the end user continuously and keeps going in there rather than just shipping and hoping it works. So what we use today in these developer tools that we have is actually a tiny amount of it, what we actually do. And I've caught myself doing that as well. I basically use the style pane and I use the console and maybe the network tooling. But the other things I haven't used much unless I needed a special case where I wanted to do it. And you see all these great conference talks where people show how performance testing, how to find out which CSS is unused in your products and these kind of things. And I often found myself not having time to actually look at that. But not having time to look at that means I wasted a lot of time in my programming and in my development that actually I could have done better and cleverly. So things are slower in rolling things out into something like developer tools or a browser, because whatever we do, we have to think about security, privacy, performance, maintainability, ownership of the code, and backwards compatibility. Browsers are slow because we cannot break the web. We do a lot of things that like bad development, it was on the web, is not maintained. We have to optimize our JavaScript engine, for example, to speed up code that was written inefficiently, but will not be maintained anymore. And of course, the browser is always the one that is to blame for it. So use cases for us drive new features. So when people ask us for things like through feedback, through Twitter, through mailing lists, through the feedback channel, which I'm going to show you later, we then make these assumptions and we say like, okay, in this case, can you adjust colors and graph about computed styles? We're like, okay, why was that request there? What was going on there? Is the contrast not high enough? What kind of setting does that person have in their computer so that it didn't work? So these feedback items mean what we're going to build next, because we learned the hard way as a market, I think, that just inventing things and throwing them out there is not working. We really have to ask hard questions for our end users, what they want, and then we can build something much better. So let's talk about the usage gap that I talked earlier a bit about. Like, what are the things that are people using and what are things in developer tools that we have as requests in our emails, and I then used for myself all of a sudden for the first time, and I thought that's pretty amazing. So the first thing that people don't realize in developer tools is that this is not only looking at the source code any longer. This is not a view source environment. This is a full stack development environment. You got your watches, you got your breakpoints, you got your stack inspection, and you can take a look at anything that is actually in the browser out there. One big request we keep getting from people is like, can you pretty print some JavaScript? And can you actually show the things better? And yes, the functionality has always been there. It's those little squiggly lines on the bottom left here, right under the captions right now. And as people couldn't find it, we just put this bar on top saying, pretty print this minified file. And then you can say more and it automatically does it and never shows. So we find these kind of ways to tell you what's going on there and what's in the browser tools already that you hadn't thought of or you hadn't found. And we just realized that little button is maybe not enough. But the first time we show it to you this way, the toolbar doesn't come up any longer, but you know now where it is. And a lot of people don't understand as well that it's a development environment. You can set up your own environment. You can add files to it. You can add workspaces to it. And it's working inside the browser. You don't even need an editor outside of it. Of course, it makes sense to have one. But if I, for example, years ago, I worked with banks in Singapore. And whenever I needed to do something on their computers, they were so locked down. I wasn't allowed to install anything. I did training with people. They didn't have any text editors on their browsers, so I didn't know what to do. Nowadays, in the browser, you have a development environment. So as soon as a browser is on there, a Chromium-based browser, or even Safari, even other Firefox as well, you have an editor in there as well. And that editor allows you to do all kinds of cool things like overrides, content scripts, and snippets. Content scripts is something that you can run against a website, much like back in the days it used to be Greasemonkey. And these can be done inside the developer tools and override things that the website is doing right now. So I want to actually bring you to consider becoming a different developer and actually get rid of that console log mentality. We keep writing code and then we put a console log in there to get some information. And we put another console log in there to put another information. And then we get this information, then we put another console log in there to get the next information. So in essence, what we're doing with a lot of console logs that probably end up in the live website later on as well is emulating a stack. We actually emulate a debugging stack by writing lots of console log statements. And that is actually inefficient. And it makes no sense because the development environments that we have stack debugging and breakpoint debugging in them. The browsers have, the editors have, and all kind of like in-between functionality is also possible. So breakpoints are actually much better than a console log because you can set the breakpoints in the browser or in your text editor. So both of them, seeing that the text editor is running the browser in the background and actually can connect to an instance of the browser and debug directly in the editor, you never have to leave the editor. Or if you don't want to do that, you can actually use debugging or breakpoint debugging in the browser as well. And there are more, I understand it that there are more work upfront. There are a different way of thinking about it. But I think once you do that, you realize the effectiveness of you as a developer gets much, much higher and better. And the thing is, like, the code execution is paused as well. Like with a console log, the errors can still slip through. So something that, like, I do a console log and something goes wrong, the page reloads, everything that I put in the form before, or every cookie that I set, or every authentication that I've done is gone as well. With a breakpoint debugging, you actually halt the execution of the JavaScript, and you get an end-to-end picture of what is happening. So instead of having to do a console log with another information point, another information point, another information point, you can go through the stack what the application is doing bit by bit, and you can do it without having to write another console log in there. You're also not likely to litter the web with yet another console message that the end user should never see. Any console log that gives me information about your code is a security problem, because it gives me information that could be an attack vector. So please, at least in your build scripts, clean up any console log before you actually put things out on a server. So one thing I found that I didn't know before, that I just found by playing with the thing, is DOM breakpoints. If you're like me and you're a visual person and you're not too excited about going for staying in the code only, I always code to build interfaces. Why not come from the interface into the debugging state rather than just having to put breakpoints in your code? And that's what DOM breakpoints actually are. So this is a task app that I've written. And in there, you can actually go to the inspect to open the developer tools then. And then you actually have all the kind of information that you have in there. You got this LI statement here, or the LI HTML element. You get the accessibility of it, how big it is. This is probably what all of you have been using in developer tools already. But there is also a little ... menu next to that LI. And that's something that I didn't see. I was blind to it. And when you click on that one, you get all kind of extra functionality. You can add an attribute, you can add this HTML, you can delete the element. You can also break on different ways of doing it. So on subtree modification, on attribute modification, and node removal. So in this one now, if I do a subtree modification, and then I delete that item by clicking that little X that I wrote, it now opens the debugger immediately. And I can now go through my application at the right spot in my JavaScript where the things happen, and I can go through it bit by bit to understand what's going on. So I don't even need to know from my code where these things happen. I can go from the interface into the code. And that's something I didn't know, and it was quite amazing to find out. Probably other people know it, and I'm just look stupid right now, but it's fun to actually find these little things and make you more effective that way. So that way now you can go bit by bit through your code and understand what each part of my code was doing. And I never had the problem that the page would reload when I made an error, for example, because I stay now in the debugging environment. If you're like me also, and you don't like a mouse too much, because I only use a trackpad, there's keyboard shortcuts for all of these things. So you can just keyboard through it, so you don't even need to use a mouse, so it's fully accessible. Which is interesting because a lot of times people want more visual tooling. So some things on the web are easier to actually visually debug. One thing I found, for example, that I hadn't used much before as well is animation editor. Developer tools have an animation editor built in that actually allows you to tweak the animations and see how fast they are, how fluent they're into each other. And this is much easier than just fiddle with the numbers, save, build again, and actually see it going on there. So you can directly in the browser find out what's going on. One thing we invented, well, we didn't invent it, but we actually revisited it. When I worked in Mozilla years ago, we had a 3D view experiment where we actually showed you the DOM of the page as a 3D view. So you can actually turn that in 3D space and see how deep the DOM is nested of your application. And this might be an indicator why your application is slow. Now we have a new 3D view in there that is actually, first of all, much faster because libraries have become better and WebGL support has become much better as well. And we're not only having the DOM view right now, but also the Z index. we found that set index debugging is weird for a lot of people. And we find that like set index of 50,000 because people wanted to make sure that something is overlapping something else and cannot actually be hidden. And the set index is not only an intrinsically set Z index, but also if you create a new rendering layer by some CSS kind of functionality or by some things that you added to the DOM, then it also shows that one. And I had an interesting one a few days ago where I saw a website of mine and it looked like this. And I was wondering why it was a bit slow. And I was just seeing this thing and I'm like, this is like, I want to get like a line writer writing under it or something. I don't know what the hell was going on there. And it turned out I had like a list, a list of items, and I had a drop shadow on all of them. I had a transition on all of them, and I actually had a position relative on all of them. And that created a new rendering index every single time. And that's why my application was slow. So I turned a few things around, I changed the layout a bit, and out of a sudden the thing was much faster. I could have done that with the performance tooling probably as well, but I find it amazing that like having a visual tool gave me the insight immediately because I saw that can't be right. Something's going very, very wrong there. Another easy to miss extra features is something that if you hover over a style setting or a style rule in your CSS, there's a little menu that actually is a ... menu on the top bottom right that you can't see here right now because I couldn't screenshot it. If you click on that one, you get like a row of icons that are basically editors for color and for box shadow. There's also a little icon when you see in the box shadow here, there's a little icon next to it that's the same icon as that. So what these things are is, for example, you can click it and then you get a color picker. That color picker is not only allowing you to pick the color, but also you can see in the bottom here, it also shows you all the colors that are already used in the page. So you actually cannot create a wrong color because you only can select from the ones that you have right now. So that's pretty amazing if you think about it. So you don't create like 500 blues, then the designer has to maintain in the next round of maintenance, which is not fun to do. Now, these menus are not accessible. So you needed a mouse to actually find them. And I actually was questioning if they're actually that useful. Because in essence, when you type box shadow, the icon appears immediately as well, and you can click on that one, or you can even just hit enter, and then the box shadow editor, like this editor here, will show up as well. And then you can start playing with that little handle and can playing with the blur and make the shadow the way you want to. So we're actually considering removing these little icons because we just didn't see any use in them. But it was fun that we had them for years and nobody complained that they were there, or nobody actually seemed to have used them. And it's tricky to actually use an interface like that in a space that is that limited as developer tools are. Other things that are currently in production in that kind of space are CSS grid tooling. That's something that a lot of people asked for. Firefox has that already. We actually using some more features in there as well. I'm also working on a source order viewer that actually will show you if you use CSS grids, that it changes the source order of the document, which is an accessibility issue, for example, for screen reader users, or also for search engines if the order is different to what you're actually displaying on the screen. Font tooling is something that we're thinking about, not only which fonts are used, but also how fast they are, how much of the download speed is actually because of slow fonts and these kind of things. Service worker lifecycle, that is a confusing thing for a lot of people as well. So we thought about like, what can we do to make this more obvious what's going on with a service worker, and what else you want. Please give us feedback, what other things you think might be useful to have, because it's all, as I said, based on feedback from people, what they want, not what we think you actually might need. Emulation is something that has been around in the developer tools for quite a while. It's not being found by a lot of people, weirdly enough, because I've been working on mobile apps for quite a while, so I used emulation in the browser the whole time. Of course, it's better to use a proper mobile phone to test your things on, because it also has the performance issues and all the kind of problems that you and the interaction that the end users have. But you can actually emulate all kinds of devices in the developer tools. So you can emulate iPhones, Pixels, Moto G4s, and so on and so forth. And you can also set the performance of them. So you can actually see if it's going to be, if you're online, if you're offline, or if you're on an older mobile phone or a low-end mobile phone. And that would slow down not only the execution of the JavaScript engine, but also drop packets in the connection and these kind of things, and simulate a bad environment that your end users might have. There's more features in the device emulation as well that a lot of people haven't found because it's again that ... menu. So for example, you can add a pixel ratio, you can add a device type, you can capture screenshots and you capture full-size screenshots. A lot of people use extensions for that in the browser, and a lot of these extensions have turned out to be like malware and things that took all kind of information from your machine. You don't need that. Developer tools have screenshots in there, and actually if you're using something like Puppeteer or Playwright, you can actually do screenshots in the background and make your computer do it for you as well. And there's all kind of extra things in there that people haven't used. For example, what I didn't find, and of something that I've written myself years and years ago, there's a ruler. You can actually have a ruler around your designs and actually see pixel perfectly where something is going and if something is aligned. So that's something that you don't need to make a screenshot and go to Photoshop and look at it there. The ruler is actually in there and has been there for years, but I've never found it myself. So I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Let's do that now. There's also interaction simulation. So if you are on an element in the Elements tab, you can see down there you have a force element state. So you can force the active focus within hover and visit it. So that way you don't actually have to interact with the web page to see these different styles. So if you want to make sure that all your styles are properly done and also accessible, and there's enough contrast and enough like visual difference between a hover state and a non-hover state, you can actually force that from the developer tools directly. There's also a right click on that one, so you can actually force the state on the LI element in the Elements tab itself, so you can force the hover, focus, and so on and forth there. So in this case, I have an emulation going on, so hover wouldn't work because that's a touch device that I'm emulating, but I can still take a look at what the hover state would look like by forcing that state in the developer tools themselves. The rendering view is something that a lot of people have never found, and it's kind of daunting the first time you take a look at it because it's all the hardcore stuff under the hood rendering what the browser engine is doing for you. So you have like paint flashing, layout shifting regions, an FPS meter, like how many frames per second are going on, or if your application is slowing down, if there's scrolling performance issues, and so on and so forth. But what I like most in there is that you can emulate different states of the device or of your end user's environment. So the first thing you can do is emulate a print design. So if you want to make sure the print design of your application or of your website is correct, you don't have to go through the print preview all the time or do the Command P to actually print something out. You can just go to print emulation and then you see the website as it would look like when somebody printed it out. There's also accessibility concerns put in there as well. So the first thing we did when we moved our engine to Chromium, we actually made the developer tools keyboard and screen reader accessible. So now everything in developer tools can be accessed with a keyboard. Before that, it was only with a mouse at times. And I love that because it makes me faster. I can tap through things and open and close things, these kind of things. And they also work in high contrast mode now. High contrast mode is something that if you're a Mac user, you probably never heard of. It's something that is in Windows, and about a not small percentage of Windows users, a few million people, are actually dependent on that. They cannot use a computer unless it's in high contrast mode. And if your product is not available in high contrast mode, you basically lost these people. So we had a problem that like you needed to change the operating system into another mode to actually test these things out. That is dark mode, light mode, and also the high contrast mode. And that is not fun because your editor then turns into high contrast as well. And all your development environment turns into high contrast, and that's daunting if you don't need that. So we're wondering, what can we do to make that easier for developers? So the first thing we made as well is like, if you're worried about seeing what I said, like there's ... menus and these kind of things, one biggest pro tip, if you want to take something away from this, is Command-Shift-P. That one gives you a command palette in the developer tools themselves. So you can start typing things, and that would actually give you the same functionality as if you went through the interface and clicked on things. So this is a much faster way to go through other things. So for example, in this case, switch to dark theme or emulate prefers color scheme dark. So in this case, you can emulate the light and dark without having to set your operating system to light and dark. You will just see what the website would look like if somebody has a dark or a light environment. And there's a CSS media query that fires when these things are changed. So you actually should have that in your application or in your web application that makes sure that people that use dark mode or light mode actually get a better experience that way. We also have a prefers reduced motion for people who actually get confused when there's animation going on the screen, or people who are just like have problems reading things when it's happening too much. They actually want to turn off animations, and your animations should actually have that check in them. If somebody has this reduced motion turned on, nothing should animate. And you don't want to turn it off yourself in the operating system all the time. You can do that in the emulation. In this case here, prefers reduced motion as well. We also have different visual simulations there for different color blindness versions, and also a blurred vision, for example. Like in this case, when you're outside and your mobile phone is that the light is on it, you would see something like that. Does it still make sense what's going on there? And you can simulate different color blindness modes as well. This has been done by Matthias Beinens of the Google team. And I actually put the blurred vision in there because we didn't think of that one before. We just had a different color blindness simulation in there as well. And the currently in production, which is coming out in, well, let's hope the next version in 2 weeks, is high contrast simulation, simpler accessible interfaces that you don't have to go through that rendering view to find these kind of things, and accessibility error reporting in context. So something saying like, this is a problem in the HTML code or in the CSS code, rather than just reporting it there. And dual screen emulation, because dual screen devices are the next big thing. And you don't want to have to buy one to actually test what your website would look like in it. The high contrast simulation looks like this, for example. So I now have my developer tools in my dark mode, like I prefer them, but the website, in this case, Wikipedia, is then displayed in high contrast view, and I can actually debug quite nicely what my application would look like. So what do we do when our computers get slow? And this is currently happening with me because my fan is starting to kick off. What's the first thing you do? You go through a task manager, or you go through the activity monitor on OS X. What a lot of people don't know is that browsers have these built in as well. So if you're wondering what's going on, what's happening slowly in your browser, there's actually in more tools in the browser itself, not the developer tools this time, there's a browser task manager. And that one shows you what process of the browser is slow, what extension might be slowing down your environment, and which tab is actually the biggest offender, what's going on there. Firefox also has that. If you do about performance in the Firefox browser, you get like that inside the browser. In our case, you get it in another window that you can actually keep on the side and keep clicking around and seeing how that changes as well. So how did these new functionality come in? I mean, I talked at the beginning that we're doing user research and then we find needs, and what then? We innovate in the open. In the Chromium project is an open source project, and it's not owned by one company. It's actually by several companies have their stake in them, and it's a thing that everybody contributes to. So we have an explainer page. Google has one as well, and other companies have them as well, where we actually describe to you what's happening in the near future. And if you want to give feedback there, it's on GitHub. Please give us feedback and file issues there. So in this case, in DevTools, you see like 3D views, CSS grid tooling. So if you want to know what's happening in the near future there, you can read that up right now and give us feedback. So nothing of that is hidden, and we're not actually doing something sinister about it. These are also connected to documents that we use internally in the Chromium team to actually talk to people from Google, from Samsung, from other companies, to actually discuss these things, how it makes sense to actually do them in a way that everybody can use them and not just only one browser would get this kind of functionality. Others join too. WebKit has explainers out. I mean, it's very easy to criticize Apple and say like, you're not doing much for the web, but they're actually started to realize that being very open makes sense and actually is a sensible thing to do. So they have their explainers out there as well. So one of the things that always fascinates me that people don't know about, and it's fun to do, is what are developer tools made of? Like what is the technology behind developer tools? Is it Silverlight? Is it Flash? Is it C#? Is it assembly? It's actually not. This is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And it's actually really cool because it's an environment that you control. You can do all kind of cool things you can't rely on the open web in this environment. And what you can do is actually find out what we've done by debugging it. So you can open developer tools with Command-Shift-I on a Mac or F12, Control-Shift-I on Windows. Then you can actually click that little icon here to put the developer tools in an own window rather than just being on the right hand or the bottom or the left side of the browser like you normally use them. The developer tools are done full screen. Then you do the same keyboard shortcut again, Command-Shift-I or F12, Control-Shift-I, and you open another instance of the developer tools. I now change these to light to actually show the difference. And what you can do now is debug the developer tools with another instance of the developer tools. So it's turtles all the way down. So if you now click on the console here, you use the inspect icon up there, you can see how the HTML of the developer tools themselves is done. And you can see all the area stuff that we put in there to make it accessible. And you can find out all kind of functionality, how we did the resizing, how we made sure that it looks like something that is like native code or native UX, but actually is HTML documents built in there. So there's nothing hidden and you can actually debug it. And that's how we actually debug developer tools when we're trying to find out when something's going wrong. That's the easiest way of doing that. There's also an inbuilt reporting tool. So there's this little icon with that man in front of the speech bubble. This one is great because if you find something in developer tools that you don't like or you're confused about, please click this. This one actually gives you a screenshot of the current page that you're debugging. It actually asks you for an email that you can give, but you don't have to. Please give us one because if you have questions, we can actually ask you that. And it also gives you, like, we can do a stack trace as well. You can send the information if you want to, don't have to again. So this is the best way to report any bugs because that goes directly into our bug queue. So I'm triaging that Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and our team is basically looking at these things all the time to find out what's going on. So instead of going to Twitter and complain to me or Facebook and things, that's the fastest way of doing it. And the rest of the world doesn't have to see you complaining either as well. That might also be a good thing. So I want to close about like what makes me happy about that whole thing that we're having with DevTools right now. And I think the main thing is that we use web technology to build developer tools. Back in the days, it was all like C++ or Java, and I didn't have a say in it because I didn't know these languages. I couldn't do anything with that. But as I know HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, I can now build developer tools. This also makes these developer tools embeddable in other software. Like VS Code, for example, is an Electron shell with Monaco inside. Monaco is the editor that actually used in VS Code that's used that you can use in your websites as well or in your web products. And it also allows us to build for the web on the web. So things like CodePen, JSBin, Code Sandbox, workspaces on GitHub is pretty amazing. You don't have to install something on your own computer or mess up the setup of your computer. You can just try it out. So if you go to JSBin or you go to CodePen and say like, I want to try Sass, don't install Sass on your own machine yet. Just put it there and play with Sass until you're happy with it, and then actually go there and then install it on your own machine. And it's fun to work with them in developer tools as it's a predictable environment. I can use all kind of cool new web technologies because I know I'm controlling the browser that runs in, which is the browser that it actually is embedded in. That's something I can never have on the web because we cannot control our end users. There's also little touches that go a long way that I find that make me happy. This is in Visual Studio Code. So say, for example, you write a function, or in this case, an arrow function. And you can see that this yellow of the do form stuff is kind of shaded. It's kind of like, what? And that is actually making sense because it means it's not used yet. Once I actually start extending that and I now write a do form stuff or a query selector and add an event listener, then it becomes yellow. So this is helping me a lot looking at old legacy code or things I've done in older products to find out which JavaScript variables are defined but never used. And this is something, a very simple little touch that I think goes a long way that we want to do more of. Like if you find more things that would help you debugging things, please tell us about that one as well. If you want to do go deeper as well, there's WebHint. That's something that I'm using all the time. It's a testing tool that tests for accessibility, performance, app readiness, compatibility with standards, pitfalls to avoid, and security issues. It's an online service, but it's also an NPM package. So you can actually include it into all of your JavaScript environments that you want to have and have automated testing of these things that are listed here. So in my case, I'm using it actually in Visual Studio Code, and I have this problems pane right now that actually shows me while I'm coding that I'm doing something wrong. So instead of me going, releasing it and then debugging it and then finding out what I've done wrong, I can immediately see it while I'm coding it, and I never get the embarrassment to have it on GitHub and have to undo it again. So by having this, my editor complain to me while I'm doing something wrong, I think I've become a much better developer the last few months because I keep thinking about things one step ahead that way. And sometimes you learn about things that you didn't know. For example, that a button needs a type equals button to work in all browsers. And I thought that was redundant, but it's still a thing that we need to have. There's also a new issues pane in the latest Canary build of Edge that actually brings this functionality into the browser tools as well. So if you want to play with that in the browser, you can turn on the experiments in the browser and see it that way. In my editor, while I'm typing things, this is what it looks like there. So it explains to me that an A is an A element from the MDN reference. So this is something, so you don't have to go to mdn.com, MDN developer tools. In the browser, you can actually see it directly in your editor. And then that A download is not supported by Internet Explorer, iOS, and Safari. So that's something I I cannot rely on if I want to be in those environments as well. And that's something that Webhint put into my editor without me actually having to look it up or having to know it. So what that taught me as well is like that you can bring other tools inside other tools. So VS Code is actually great because it also has a terminal in it. It also has a Git environment in it. And it actually, I don't have to jump between the contexts all the time. I don't have to be in my browser and in my editor. Back in the days, I wrote code in my editor, went to the browser, debugged it, went back. What did I change in the CSS again? I can't remember right now what was going on there. Wouldn't it be great if we have DevTools in VS Code itself? And this is what we're having with an extension used to be called Elements for Code, but now it's actually DevTools for Code. And what that means, you don't need to switch from Visual Studio Code to the browser and back. You can run the browser in the background, connect to an instance of the browser, and debug it directly inside the editor. This is what it looks like. This is now inside VS Code. I have a screen that is a live environment of the browser. So I can click that, I can interact with it, I can set breakpoints, and I can do all kinds of things that I expect. And I've got the styles pane and the styles editor directly in the VS Code environment, so I don't need to go to the browser. This is the first thing we put in. The next thing we want to put in is the network as well, so the network pane, and whatever you want to see in there, play with that and see what's going on if you like it, because it made my life much easier as well, because I didn't have to jump between the two anymore all the time. So that's all I have, and please stay in touch. Edge DevTools on Twitter, CodePoet on Twitter, christianheilmann.com, and that feedback icon in the Edge Developer Tools is something that goes directly into our workflow. And I think that's the easiest way to tell us what you want. These things are made for you. If you're confused about something, if you think it's not working, please tell us about that. We want to know what's not working. We want to make sure that these developer tools make you a better developer. I'm tired of tools that are tools for experts, that you have to be an expert to understand them. I want tools to make you an expert by using them, by learning more, by finding out like, oh, I didn't know that a button needs a type equals button, and now I'm kind of an expert in that case. The developer tools told me what I'm doing wrong. I didn't have to understand them up front. And I think we've done a disservice by putting so many things in the developer tools without explaining them properly. So I'm spending a lot of time on documenting these things right now and writing documentation. So hopefully that will help some of you also find out things that I discovered in this talk or by researching for this talk. If you want to have something like that, please tell us about that. And if you found something cool that I might not know about, please tell me about that as well. That's all I had. So thanks very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris. It was amazing, amazing presentation with a lot of valuable information. I love this idea about reporting the problems. I use it a lot for example, Visual Studio Code, and I saw the same icon on the edge. So yeah, that's great.
We had a different one before, so that was a confusion point because Internet Explorer had this smiley icon, and Visual Studio Code then had another one. So we actually aligned them and make sure there's no confusion.
Yeah, yeah. So one more time, thank you so much. Big applause, everybody, for Chris for this great presentation. And I hope to see you soon in person. I hope to see you soon on JS Poland also. So one more time, thank you so much. And yeah, it was amazing presentation.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.